Welcome. We'll get started now. Thank you again for joining us today for part 2. What do I include? Documenting compliance under the revised standards. The presentation you are viewing has been prepared for and is the property of the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. Reproduction is expressly prohibited without prior written consent from MSCHE. For permission requests, please email MSCHE at president@msche.org. For any questions about an institution's accreditation status or for additional information about the standards for accreditation, requirements of affiliation, policies and procedures, and applicable federal regulatory requirements, you should contact the MSCHE staff. Always seek the advice of your institution's assigned vice president liaison with any questions specific to your institution. My name is Edna Corbett. I'm Senior Vice President for Accreditation Relations with the Commission. And with me today, you will see on the screen are Dr. Sean McKittrick, Vice President for Institutional Field Relations, Dr. Terrence Peavy, Vice President for Institutional Field Relations, and Dr. Diana Barbu, Senior Director for Research. I will get us started and then each one of us will take turns. The document we are discussing today is Evidence Expectations by Standard Guidelines. This is a companion document to the newly revised standards for accreditation and requirements of affiliation, 14th edition. I want to take this opportunity to explain the word guidelines. As you know, Middle States has policies, procedures, and guidelines. So policy statements are brief. Procedures are extensive and speak about the processes of accreditation activities and several other policies related to accreditation with Middle States. And guidelines is a third type of document that provide additional guidelines, additional guidance for the institutions on how to comply with the various policies. So this one in particular is the Evidence Expectations by Standards Guidelines. So what is the purpose of these guidelines? The purpose of Evidence Expectations by Standard is to provide a list of expectations for the types of evidence that an institution should collect, analyze, and submit as part of the self-reflective self-study evaluation process. But it's not only for the self-study process evaluation that occurs every 8 years. Compliance with the standard is a continuous process, and therefore compilation and analysis of these expectations of evidence should occur on a regular basis, on a continuous basis on campus. The purpose, again, of these guidelines is to identify required data and documentation that aligns with the policy and procedures with the Commission, and that aligns specifically with the standards and the criteria. Please note that it is not designed to replace the self-reflection that accompanies the accreditation process. Evidence is not sufficient. At any point that you are required to submit a report, we are expecting that the evidence is provided to supplement and to demonstrate what is being discussed in the narrative for that particular report. Therefore, self-reflection and analysis are expected related to any of these evidence items. I'd like to pass it on now to Dr. Peavy. Terrence?
Thank you, Edna. The guideline documents to the Commission's commitment to data-influenced decision-making and the expectations for evidence. So let's begin by looking at the foundations of the Commission's work. Here you see the Commission's mission, vision, and values. I want to highlight the mission of Middle States: to promote educational excellence through innovation across diverse institutions. These are the 6 strategic priorities of the Commission from 2020 to 2025, highlighted as a key priority and our commitment to data-influenced decision-making in all of our work. The Commission will utilize data across processes to support decision-making, explore the adoption and the use of student clearinghouse data as a condition of membership, and consider how predictive analytics can lend to the work of accreditation. Within our 14th edition of the Standards of Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation, the introduction also incorporates data and evidence-based decision-making as one of the 5 principles that guide the analysis of each of our 7 standards. As you can see, the Commission's mission, vision, and values, its strategic priorities, and the work that has been done recently to revise the standards of accreditation and requirements of affiliation, the evidence expectation by standard guidelines, which you'll hear about today, remains aligned with our commitment to data and its role in decision-making. Next, Diana will discuss regulatory requirements for data.
Thank you, Darren. So in addition to these processes, we also have external regulatory requirements we need to abide by, set forth by the U.S. Department of Education. Data influence decision-making has been an important strategic priority for the Commission. This priority is in line with the national trends as the focus on data has continued to increase at the federal, state, and institutional level. All accreditation activities include requirements for submission of evidence and data, such as the annual institutional update and the self-study evaluation, as well as substantive change and follow-up activities. The Commission uses data as a component of its evaluation of institutions. The Commission has been focusing on quantitative and qualitative data and analysis. Quantitative data and studies have served as a great starting point for deeper conversations and opportunities to provide context as well as to help institutions tell their story. Additionally, the Commission, Sean, conducted extensive qualitative studies to identify trends. One of these studies includes the top 10 strategic priorities coming out of self-studies at the MSCHE level. Sean may reference them in another slide. All in all, there has always been a focus on data, and with the new standards, we are taking this a step further by enhancing our focus on promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion for all student populations. So speaking of federal requirements, every 5 years, the Commission gets reviewed for reauthorization by the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, in short, NACIQI. The Commission submits an extensive report to USDA and then appears in front of the NACIQI committee. The most recent reauthorization happened at the beginning of March, and we have been reauthorized for a period of 5 years. The focus of NACIQI has been on process and data. In preparation for the appearance, we ran several studies using data collected through the AIU, iPads, College Scorecard, Federal Student Aid, NACIQI dataset, and as well as other sources to provide a comprehensive picture of our activities, as well as how the data is used to enhance decision-making processes, as well as to advance student success. Here's an example of the studies we ran as part of our recognition process. Using the data provided by institutions, we disaggregated data to tell our story. We always encourage self-reflection so that institutions find it useful in creating their evidence-based narratives. So what you have in front of you is the result of 2 studies that focused on graduation rates as well as completer and transfer out rates as tracked by iPads and the NACIQI dataset. We examined how MSCHE institutions performed in comparison with similar institutions nationally. And as you can see in both graphs, MSCHE institutions outperformed the rest of the institutions, and this has been especially the case for bachelor's level institutions. For associates level institutions, the performance have been somewhat similar. Our goal with these studies was to provide big picture and actionable information to NACIQI by disaggregating the data and identifying trends for our institutions. Some other studies focused on performance by institutional type, such as public, private, non-for-profit, private, for-profit institutions, as well as minority serving institutions, or as we mentioned before, by institutional level, like bachelor's, associates. I'm just touching on this to provide some examples of the disaggregation that served our agency's need. The focus on data and on data disaggregation, it's also reflected in the new standards. While the focus is on disaggregation, we encourage you to identify the best disaggregation that makes sense for your institution. And now Sean will explain the process that we follow.
Thank you, Diana. And to note that the Commission comprehensively mapped each standard to applicable federal regulatory requirements, which was expertly performed by our policy and other staff. After this mapping, Commission staff engaged in an organized and systematic approach to find the most relevant and useful information that institutions use to engage in an evidence-based narrative that can enable such institutions to demonstrate ongoing compliance with Commission expectations and to continuously adapt and innovate. The Commission staff conducted a comprehensive mapping of applicable, of all those federal regulatory requirements, but they also engaged in an analysis of actual institutional submissions and the evidence that institutions and peer evaluators have found most relevant and useful during accreditation activities. The Commission has enhanced its research and policy review capacities over the years to achieve aspects of its mission, addressed just a few minutes ago by Terrence. The Commission has also observed from a systematic review of self-study reports, team reports, and other sources of information already collected by institutions that the Commission already requires institutions to submit, reference, or use evidence in various ways, be it within self-study reports, evidence inventories, accreditation readiness reports, substantive change submissions, and other relevant Commission processes. Our interest was to learn more about what evidence was most commonly used, either because the new standards already required their use or otherwise, or USED expects these to be used. With these interests in mind, we sauntered forth and conducted several studies over a number of years to address these interests. For example, as noted on this slide, we conducted an environmental scan and policy review. We reviewed the higher education and accreditation related policy environment to observe current expectations regarding higher education and accreditation policy trends and anticipated changes. 2, we conducted studies of common evaluation approaches. NACICI has already developed a scorecard for accrediting agencies, suggesting that these are highly recommended, if not required, in the Commission's evaluation events. The Commission has identified various metrics and documents that should be submitted at some point or used at some point in the reaffirmation process. For example, we already require evidence of financial health in the form of some ratios or in the form of net assets, and these are often used as part of an institution's composite financial index, as well as other indicators such as student achievement and enrollment changes. 3, we conducted an evidence inventory analysis. For several years, we've required institutions to upload documents onto a portal to be used by self-study evaluation teams. After tallying documents by standards and where appropriate, we reviewed over 160 self-study reports to date and identified the most common documents, metrics, and other evidence. And finally, the use of qualitative and quantitative information from the IPED system, college scorecard, or other repositories and approaches. Over the last few years, we conducted analyses that helped us learn about what elements we should strongly recommend that institutions use in the self-study evaluation process. So let's look at each of these approaches used by the Commission. First, we conducted qualitative analyses of the most common evidence used in self-study reports and in the institutional portals, and created a kind of top 10 list that enabled us to review what some of the most common documents used by standard were and where such documents are used across the standards. We concluded that there were many opportunities for identifying common evidence across the standards. For example, All institutions are required to submit an annual financial audit attesting to an institution's having a sufficient financial base to operate. But many of those same audits contain financial ratios and even the percentage core expenditures for certain critical areas. After tallying various documents and evaluating assessment information relevant to the standard, we found that most institutions use their annual institutional audit and financial statements, as well as their institution's strategic plans. Many institutions use facilities master plans and organizational charts. And it was also interesting to observe that many key performance indicators were commonly used across the standards by our member institutions. Over the last few years, Commission staff harvested data from the US Ed's DAPIP site, which contained information about which institutions did well or not so well in the evaluation process. We also coded self-study reports by evaluation method and, where possible, documents, and then merged this information into a database. In this mixed methods design, we were then able to identify what evaluation approaches and documents were most likely used by institutions that had little or no follow-up as a result of their submitting self-study evaluation reports and participating in a subsequent visit. In addition, the aforementioned policy analysis enabled us to evaluate which elements were required by USDE, NASICI, the Commission, and other agencies in its development of the annual institutional update. Another observation was that most institutions appear to provide the information we list in the guidance document already. For example, applicant institutions were required to submit specific evidence as part of their process in which they used to demonstrate their readiness to earn candidacy in something called the Accreditation Readiness Report, or ARR, something that is very much like the evidence inventory, a required tool used by member institutions either to earn an initial grant of accreditation or to earn reaffirmation of accreditation. All things considered, this policy analysis, combined with the research noted earlier, enabled us to consider what evidence institutions should use when they engage in self-study. The policy analysis enabled us to contextualize our analysis and focus on evidence that would give our institutions the most power for the buck, so to say, by focusing on evidence that directly aligned with Commission expectations in the hopes of achieving efficiency, usefulness, and meaningfulness to pre-applicant, applicant, candidate, and member institutions, all the while respecting mission and institutional type and sector. So, all things considered, our approach has been not to indiscriminately list all approaches and hope for the best. Instead, the process has been to identify systematically approaches, documents, qualitative assessments, quantitative assessments, and evaluation methods, and so forth, and then to ask, what is most meaningful and useful to evaluators, commissioners, and institutions as they endeavor to demonstrate compliance with Commission expectations or to do their work? After conducting some of the approaches referenced a few minutes ago, we began with a relatively large list, followed by discussions about what information is now required or is highly favored during a Commission evaluation event, and even then asking what evidence would most directly reference Commission expectations. This was followed by discussions and outreach to Middle States as member institutions for comment. The result has been what we have now. Now, to turn this over to Terrence, who will discuss the evidence expectations by standard guidelines document.
Thank you, Sean. As we reflect on the positive changes within the 14th edition of the Standards of Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation, one might consider the influence of the evidence expectations. Evidence is comprised of a wide variety of document types, including but not limited to written documentation or approvals, policies and procedures, sample material, quantitative data tables or charts, qualitative data tables or surveys. This evidence affirms the self-reflective, self-study evaluation process undertaken by institutions and relied upon by others in the process. Please know that middle states is required by regulation to be consistent in collecting evidence for institutions. The evidence that institutions have submitted up until this point form the basis of expectation. We also know that some flexibility in submission of the evidence for certain standards may not apply to certain institutions. As for the layout of the evidence expectation document, it is comprised of 3 parts. The standard is identified at the top of the document, along with its description. The standard criterion are located on the left side of the document, while the list of expected evidence is located on the right across from the criterion. It is important to emphasize that the evidence can be represented in different types of documentation. Within the evidence expectation that accompanies the 14th edition of the Standards of Accreditation, we have highlighted examples here: plans, written documentation or approvals, policies and procedures, sample materials, quantitative data tables or charts, and qualitative data reports. In the preceding slides, each presenter will describe each documentation and the standards to which they apply and show examples. Ina will begin with plan documentation.
Thank you. One type of evidence that is part of the expected evidence by the standard is plans. Now, there are many different kinds of plans, and how the institution plans depends on the mission, on the characteristics, the sector. It depends on the size or where you are as an institution in your planning. But as part of this process, and in conjunction with providing evidence for compliance with the various standards, we see that certain plans are expected to be included as part of the evidence. And so, for example, as we see on the screen, a strategic plan or an institutional effectiveness plan is expected for standards 1 and also for standard 6. So the same document can be uploaded for both. An enrollment plan is expected for standard 4. Also, an institutional assessment plan. We have talked about what is expected under standard 5, educational effectiveness assessment, so an institutional-wide plan, and then probably there would be unit-based plans or department-based plans as well. Part of the expected evidence is also a financial plan for standard 6, and also within that same standard, an information technology master plan and a comprehensive plan for facilities, equipment, and supplies. So please understand that the type of plan or how this plan is presented really depends on the institution. And each institution decides what is the best way that they can present this plan. However, what they need to demonstrate is that they're looking forward. They're analyzing what is happening at the moment, and then how are they planning ahead. So for example, an information technology master plan is not only about where you are right now, but given the many changes that are occurring on a daily basis on technology, an institution should be planning and should be budgeting for when the changes in technology need to occur. And it is up to what is required for their departments and for their students, what the institution decides what is included. But what we would like to see is that the institution is considering the need for replacement or the need for updating their technology as part of their plan. Another type of evidence is policies and procedures. And so I'm going to take an opportunity here to make a connection between our policies, the Middle States policies and procedures, and the required evidence that is now incorporated in this document. The list includes required evidence, and then if it is a requirement to demonstrate compliance with a commission policy and procedure, you will see that that particular policy or procedure is highlighted or is listed in italics after the evidence that is required. So if it relates to it, the name of the policy will be called out in parentheses. If it relates to a federal requirement, then you will see that we have called out a verification of compliance with state and other accredited agency or verification of compliance with federal regulations. So again, that regulation is going to be called out in parentheses. And I see that somebody has asked the question, how do we know which ones they are? They are called out within the document, but you also will find the verification of compliance information on our website under institution, click resources, and you will see the information on the verification of compliance. So the next type of evidence is policies and procedures. So you will find that in the document, you are asked for several types of different policies. The list that I have here on the screen is by no means exhaustive. So there are many types of policies that are expected here. And an example is there should be an academic freedom policy under Standard 2. And definitely there should be a policy to managing and addressing student complaints and grievances and managing employee complaints and grievances. Under Standard 3, we find that you should have included among your evidence your credit hour assignment policy, maybe your transfer policy, certainly the policy for determining faculty qualifications. Under Standard 4, you are expected to have a policy for ensuring the ethical recruitment and marketing practices for your institutions. And as I mentioned before, under Standard 5, which deals with assessment, not only are you expected to have a plan for assessment, but also a policy that guides the assessment processes at the institution. Under Standard 6, a budgeting policy is definitely an excellent companion to your budgeting plan. And then under Standard 7, there's several other policies. There are policies related to conflict of interest and board members, but there is one particular policy that should definitely be there, which is the evaluation of the CEO. What this policy looks like, or what this policy look like, depends on the institution and how they develop, approve, and implement policies. So please note that in addition to providing the policy and procedures as part of the evidence inventory, you will also need to provide the evidence of how these policies are developed, how they are implemented, and how they are periodically reviewed and revised to ensure they continue to be relevant and meaningful for your institution. Terrence?
Thank you, Ina. I'm discussing the written documentation or approvals. As you can see here by the examples, as Ina mentioned, you'll see some duplication of documents that could be satisfied as evidence for one particular standard, and for obviously talking about this type of evidence of written documentation or approvals. Within mission, within standard and goals, and you can also see within policies, we're basically looking for institutions to provide written evidence or written documentation of various approvals within your institution. And so again, these are things that are present within your institutions. And it's just a matter of, again, organizing the data and the evidence so that it now complies with our evidence inventory. And Sean is next with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Great, thank you, Terrence. So the commission, consistent with the commission's membership and its approved mission, vision, and goals, documentation should address expectations as they relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including breakdown of DEI data into various subpopulations where appropriate to mission. So on this slide, you will see basically indications of where DEI are represented within the standards. So when we'll see standard 1, there's an expectation that diversity, equity, and inclusion goals and alignment exist with regard to institutional goals and mission. Certainly for standard 2, data on hiring and promotion broken down by subpopulations. So as you go down this list, you'll see a lot of emphasis on breaking down on relevant subpopulations and to consider DEI principles in the case of Standard 6 and the development and implementation of the institution's strategic plan. And with regard to Standard 7, we would expect information along the lines of race and ethnicity and so forth with regard to governing board members and their subpopulations. And turn this now to Diana. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Sean. So the Commission utilizes IPADS data in the annual institutional update because the vast majority of MSEG institutions report to IPADS. The evidence expectation document aligns with the AIU and extends the attention placed on analyzing consistent data metrics and indicators across a variety of accreditation activities. Therefore, the Commission has identified a variety of IPADS surveys, data elements, and definitions in the evidence expectation document. In this way, there is some level of consistency in the way rates are calculated, as well as consistency in the evidence used to evaluate institutions. Non-IPADS institutions will select metrics and indicators that are most appropriate to their mission, are reasonably valid and reliable, and are consonant with the higher education expectations. As discussed earlier, the focus on data has continued to increase. The new standards focus on high-level as well as disaggregated data. Here's a list of various data points that can support the new standards. As mentioned before, a variety of these data points are collected through IPADS, and we most often access them this way. But because data disaggregation and student populations are defined at the institutional level, the institution will be the best source of data for data points that support various standards. So, student information includes student achievement metrics, such as retention, progression, graduation rates, completions, degrees awarded numbers, transfer in, transfer out rates at various points in time. So some examples of disaggregation may include first-generation students, transfer in or transfer out students, students by socioeconomic status, traditional and non-traditional students, online students, and so on. Moving away from student data, human resources evidence includes various types of information, such as employee headcounts. Remember that the standards call for sufficient number of administrators, sufficient number of faculty, and so on. It is up to each institution to do the analysis of what and indicate what is sufficient for their mission and characteristics. Regarding financial information, some of it is collected through IPADS, but the most up-to-date and best disaggregation will again come from the institution. Some financial information refers to students, such as financial aid profile, loan cohort default rates, under Standard 2. Student financial information may also include other elements, such as cost of attendance, net price, tuition and fees, number and percent of Pell students. It is worth remembering and mentioning that each institution defines its disaggregation and identifies the student populations as applicable. And because of that, the institution will most often be the best source of data to demonstrate compliance with the new standards. So I'll pass it on to Sean to talk more about the organization of evidence.
Thanks again, Diana. A few words on the identification and organization of evidence is warranted here. Be they for the evidence inventory during a self-study evaluation visit, the development of an accreditation readiness report to achieve candidacy or other evaluation events. Institutions should think early about developing and implementing a clear strategy for documenting compliance that should be ongoing and sustainable. Linkages between standards, their criteria, and such evidence should be clearly aligned and is not only sustainable, but adds value to the process, meaning the work put into depicting clear linkages and to use evidence that is organized in a useful fashion can make the process more efficient and cost-effective. The Commission continues to recognize that evidence is mission-specific, and there will be exceptions for instances or for institutions that do not report to IPEDS or for which certain data points are not applicable to an institution. When the required evidence is not applicable to mission, the institution should explain in the narrative of the written report why certain data points are not applicable, or which data points are more appropriate to tell the institution's story, and demonstrate how the institution is meeting its mission and serving constituents effectively. Again, an evidence-based narrative relevant to the institution type and sector. The list of required evidence is designed to support the self-reflective accreditation process. Institutions must analyze and disaggregate a range of data to ensure student populations are appropriately served and relevant to institutional mission, goals, and priorities. That relevance is well ingrained within the narrative. Institutions certainly will leverage data throughout the self-reflective accreditation process to analyze and demonstrate how it is meeting its mission and serving constituents effectively. Now to turn this over to Terrence.
Actually touched on some of the elements here. This is not the last time you'll have an opportunity to learn more about either the revisions of the standard and or the evidence expectation. We actually have a number of opportunities for the membership going into the future. As we mentioned, the first group that will be involved in the new revised standards would be the cohort coming into our Self-Study Institute. That will take place between the months of September and November. And then we also have training, which you can see listed here on the slide, but also go to our website where we actually have all of the upcoming events will be listed there, so you can get the time and date. Ida.
Thank you. I just want to reemphasize that this part 2 is not the only one. We will have continuous conversations, and that is why you have seen as part of the webinars, we have webinars on metrics and data, because that is, we will continue to have different types of webinars that respond to the needs of our institutions and allows them to understand and choose which are the best types of evidence to include as part of their demonstration of compliance with the standards. But we want to invite you to come to our 2023 annual conference, which will be celebrated on December 4th through 6th in Philadelphia. So our theme for this year is transformation through accreditation. And as you can see, we're still going, and we have been going through major transformation, and so have you as your institution. So we look forward to having you come and present with us. Also, we are part of the 21st century, so please follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, I think that is Twitter and Instagram. So you can follow us at any of those at msche.org. And I want to now take the time to thank my colleagues, thank our interpreters. Thank you very much for the work that you have done with us today. Thank you for those of you in the background, our staff, Becca and Vicky, who have been have helped us prepared for this webinar, and the entire staff at MSCHE. Thanks you for being part of this webinar and for being an active participant in our process of transformation. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, everyone.